My parents chose my brother's birthday over the funeral of my wife and 2 children. When I broke the tragic news, my father calmly replied, "Today is your brother's birthday. We can't come." I said nothing. Just buried them alone. 6 months later, one headline about me sent my entire family into absolute panic. Local man turns tragedy into empire. $420 million charity fund announced in his family's name. Suddenly, the same people who turned their backs on me were clawing at my door. But I only had one answer: you made your choice. This isn't just a story about betrayal or the devastating loss that shatters a man's world. This is about what happens when your own flesh and blood chooses a meaningless empire over your broken heart, and how that unforgivable injustice sparked a war that would burn everything down. My name's Alex, and if you ask me what I do, I'd probably just give a wry smile and say, I'm navigating the storms my own family stirred up. This isn't some fairy tale, or a Hollywood movie with a guaranteed happy ending. This is my life, a messy tangle of love, betrayal, and wounds that, even now, sometimes feel like they'll never truly heal. So, grab a seat, because I'm about to take you into my world, where supermarkets aren't just places to shop, but battlegrounds of ambition, ego, and broken hearts. I grew up in a mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place where even the air seemed to carry the scent of old money. My family, the Whitmores, were a symbol of wealth and power. My father, Charles Whitmore, was the CEO of Whitmore Retail Group, a high-end supermarket empire that spanned across America. If you ever stepped into a Whitmore store, you'd see shelves gleaming, stocked with expensive wines and imported cheeses, organic produce flown in from across the globe. Everything was perfect, pristine. That was my father's world. A world where everything had to be exquisite, and I, as the eldest son, was destined to inherit it all. "Alex," he'd say, his voice low and sharp as a blade, "you're the future of Whitmore retail. Don't let me down." I'd nod, a 10-year-old boy, feeling the impossible weight of an entire family's legacy settling on my tiny shoulders. Our household wasn't just a family, it felt more like a dynasty. My mother, Monica, always in silken pearls, her eyes often distant, as if she were a ghost in her own lavish life. My younger brother, Nathaniel, was a carbon copy of my father, always knowing how to please him, how to flash the right smile at the right moment. And me? I was the one who asked questions, the one who felt suffocated at dinner parties where guests only talked about stocks and European vacations. But my life truly changed when I met Elena. She was a light in my dark, suffocating world, and unknowingly, the spark that ignited every single tragedy that followed. I met Elena Lancaster during my sophomore year at Stanford. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, leaves falling golden across the paths. I was buried in an economics textbook in the library when she walked in, bringing with her a fresh breeze and the scent of coffee. Elena was unlike anyone I'd ever met. Simple sweater, hair in a ponytail, her brown eyes sparkling like they held untold stories. She sat across from me, accidentally dropped a pen. I picked it up, handed it to her, and when our hands touched, I felt a jolt, an electric current that shocked me alive. "Thank you," she said, flashing a smile that made me forget everything. "I'm Elena Lancaster." "Alex Whitmore," I managed, my heart pounding like a drum. We started talking, and I quickly realized Elena wasn't the type to show off. She was brilliant, sharp, but had a sincerity that made me feel like I could finally shed the armor I'd worn for years. She talked about her family, about her father, Robert Lancaster, the founder of Lancaster Market, a chain of budget supermarkets serving working-class communities. "My dad always says," Elena laughed, "everyone deserves to eat well, not just the wealthy." I chuckled, but a cold twinge of unease stirred within me. Lancaster Market. That name was no stranger. It was the sworn enemy of Whitmore retail. The Lancasters and the Whitmores were like two sides of the same coin, coexisting in the industry, but as different as night and day. My father prided our family on being the brand of the elite, where customers would drop hundreds on a bottle of olive oil just because of its handcrafted bottle. "Those cheap supermarkets," he'd snarl, "they sell to people who don't know quality. They tarnish the retail industry." He'd said that during a shareholders' meeting when I was just 16, allowed to sit in and observe. But Robert Lancaster, Elena's father, had built his company on a completely different mission, bringing quality food to every American household, regardless of income. They even had a free meals program for children in underserved areas. My father called it cheap PR stunts. I never dared say it aloud, but I thought it was something Whitmore retail could never achieve, making a real difference in the community. The rivalry wasn't just talk, it was a full-blown war. Lawsuits, battles over prime real estate. Once, at an industry conference, my father and Robert Lancaster nearly came to blows. My brother, Nathaniel, jokingly called it the war of the vegetable vendors, but to me, it felt like a tragic comedy where both sides were too consumed by their egos to see the harm they were causing. Despite all the barriers, Elena and I fell in love. Our dates weren't at fancy restaurants, we preferred a small diner in Palo Alto, eating burgers and laughing about economics exams. Elena always carried a notebook, jotting down ideas for improving food supply chains. If we could deliver fresh produce within 24 hours at a low cost, she'd say, her eyes shining, people wouldn't have to choose between quality and their budget. I loved her passion, the way she saw the world, not through the lens of wealth, but through simple, profound values. But I knew, deep down, our love was a ticking time bomb. My father would never accept Elena, not just because she was Robert Lancaster's daughter, but because she represented everything he despised. The storm hit one winter evening when I brought Elena home to meet my family. I braced myself, but I didn't expect things to go as badly as they did. The mansion glowed with lights, the dining table set like a royal banquet. My mother offered a stiff smile. Nathaniel sat with his arms crossed, a scowl on his face. And my father? He looked at Elena as if she were an intruder. Mom, Dad, this is Elena Lancaster, I introduced, trying to keep my voice calm. She's studying with me at Stanford. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence so thick I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Then my father spoke, his voice cold as ice. Lancaster. Robert Lancaster's daughter. The one ruining the retail industry. Elena gripped my hand under the table, but she didn't back down. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice clear and steady, my father built Lancaster Market to help people, not to ruin anyone. My father gave a mocking laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Help people? You think selling cheap goods to the poor is helping them? You're tarnishing this family's name, Alex. You're disappointing me. That evening ended in a horrific argument. My father stood, pointed at me, and shouted, if you choose this girl, you're no longer my son. Nathaniel sat silently, but I saw the corner of his mouth curl as if he were enjoying the drama. My mother just bowed her head, clutching her napkin. I walked Elena to her car, apologizing for everything. But she just shook her head, hugged me, and said, Alex, I don't need your family to accept me. I just need you. The weeks that followed were even worse. My father summoned me to his office in Manhattan, a vast room with windows overlooking the New York skyline, but the atmosphere inside felt like a prison. He sat behind his desk, eyes cold and piercing. I've made my decision, he said. Nathaniel will inherit the company. You're no longer in the plan. I stood there, feeling the floor collapse beneath me. Because of Elena? I asked, my voice hoarse. Because you've betrayed this family, he replied. You chose the daughter of our enemy, a girl unworthy of the Whitmore name. From now on, you're on your own. I left that office, my mind reeling. I'd lost my place in the company, my father's approval, perhaps my entire family. But when I called Elena and heard her warm voice, I knew I'd made the right choice. She was my home, the place where I belonged. Meanwhile, I visited the Lancaster family in Portland. Their home was in the suburbs, a modest wooden house with a small garden bursting with vegetables. Robert Lancaster, Elena's father, welcomed me like an old friend. He wore a worn-out shirt, his hands calloused from years of working in the store. Alex, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, you love my daughter, and that's enough. I don't care if you're Charles Whitmore's son or anyone else. I looked at him, then at Elena standing beside him, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly accepted. But deep down, I knew the war between the Whitmores and the Lancasters wasn't just about business. It was personal. And I was standing right on that dividing line. My story was just beginning. Because this wasn't just a story about supermarkets, money, or power. It was a story about hearts, choices, and the brutal price you pay when you dare to live true to yourself. 3 years. It had been 3 years since that fateful evening when my father disowned me, when Nathaniel became the heir, when I chose Elena over a legacy that felt like a gilded cage. 3 years, yet every time I looked in the mirror, I could still see my father's eyes, cold and piercing, judging me from afar. I didn't join Lancaster Market, even though Robert offered me a position multiple times. You have talent, he'd said. You could help us bring good food to more people. But I declined. I wanted to stand on my own, not be known as the son-in-law propped up by his wife's family. Or perhaps, deep down, I still felt a pang of guilt. Joining Lancaster Market then would have felt like betraying my own father, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So, I chose a different path. I joined FreshRoute, a small logistics startup in Seattle, focused on fresh food supply chains. My job, figure out how to get fresh produce from farms to consumers within 24 hours at the lowest possible cost. It was grueling work, long days in a stuffy office, late nights crunching data. But I loved it. I loved the feeling of creating something meaningful, working with people who didn't care whose son I was, only what I could do. Elena and I got married on a spring afternoon, about 3 years after we graduated. The wedding was in a small church on the outskirts of Portland. No lavish receptions, no guests in Armani suits. Just the Lancaster family, a few close friends from Stanford, and a kind priest. Robert walked Elena down the aisle, his eyes shining with pride and a touch of sadness. "You're my son now, Alex," he whispered, hugging me after the ceremony. "Take care of her." No one from the Whitmore family showed up. I'd sent an invitation, though I knew in my heart they wouldn't come. My mother sent a brief text, "Wishing you happiness, Alex." "I'm sorry." My father said nothing. "Nathaniel?" He posted a photo on social media, raising a glass of wine at a party in the Hamptons, with the caption, "Congrats to my brother on his big day, choosing love over family." I read it, a stab in my chest, but I didn't respond. I'd learned that sometimes, silence is the strongest reply. Seattle, where Elena and I settled, was a city of mild climate and lush nature. Our apartment was modest, on the 5th floor of a modern building, with windows overlooking Puget Sound. It wasn't the Greenwich Mansion, but it was ours. I still remember the day we moved in, Elena standing amidst a pile of cardboard boxes, hands on her hips, laughing. "Alex, we have a kitchen table." "A real kitchen table." I laughed, pulled her into my arms, and we stood there, surrounded by chaos, happier than ever. 2 years later, Olivia was born. A miniature Elena, big brown eyes, a radiant smile, and a stubborn streak that both charmed and exasperated me. When Olivia was 3, Marcus arrived, a quiet boy with eyes just like mine. Watching our 2 children play on the living room floor, I felt like I'd found the true meaning of life. It wasn't the gleaming shelves of Whitmore retail, the revenue numbers, or million-dollar deals. It was these moments. Olivia's laughter as I pushed her on a swing. Marcus babbling papa as I lifted him into my arms. Elena was the soul of our family. She worked part-time for a non-profit, helping underserved communities access fresh food. In the evenings, she'd sit at the kitchen table, writing, or discussing new ideas. "If we could cut transportation costs by another 10%, she'd say, her eyes sparkling, we could get fresh carrots to even the poorest neighborhoods." I loved how she always thought of others, how she turned the simplest things into something extraordinary. But not everything was perfect. Despite my efforts to cut ties, the Whitmore's shadow loomed. My mother called occasionally, her voice laced with guilt, never daring to go too far. "Alex, are you doing okay?" "How are the kids?" she'd ask, and I'd answer briefly, knowing she'd never stand up to my father. Nathaniel was different. He seemed to relish reminding me I'd been cast out. Once, he sent me an article about Whitmore retail with a message, "Look at what you're missing. We just opened 5 new stores in California. Too bad for you." I didn't reply, but his words still cut deep. Not because I regretted leaving my father's empire, but because a small part of me still hoped my family would change. I wrote letters to my mother, sending photos of Olivia and Marcus, sharing stories. But those letters rarely got a response. Once, my mother sent a birthday card for Olivia with a $10,000 check. I returned it with a note, "Thank you, Mom. But we don't need the money. We're happy." Life at FreshRoute wasn't always easy. Our startup was small, competing with giants. Some weeks I worked 80 hours, dozing off at my desk, coming home with dark circles under my eyes. But Elena was always there with a hot cup of coffee and a smile. "You're doing something amazing, Alex," she'd say. "Every FreshRoute truck means a family eating fresh produce. Don't give up." And I didn't. We developed a real-time tracking system that cut delivery times from 48 hours to 24. Small farms began to trust us, and Fresh Roots revenue grew steadily. I wasn't making millions like my father, but I was proud that my work had meaning. I was building something, not to get rich, but to make life better for others. One Sunday afternoon, Elena and I took Olivia and Marcus for a picnic at a park near our home. Olivia, now 5, ran across the grass, chasing a butterfly. Marcus sat on my shoulders, giggling as I pretended to be a horse. Elena lay on the blanket, reading a book, occasionally looking up at us with a gentle smile. "You know," she said, "sometimes I think we found paradise." I sat beside her, pulling her into my arms. "My paradise is you," I said, and she laughed, playfully punching my shoulder. "So cheesy, Whitmore." It was a perfect moment. One of those you want to frame and keep forever. But I didn't know that just a few hours later, everything would shatter like a bursting bubble. That was the last picnic where I could still hold Elena's hand, where I could watch Olivia and Marcus run across the grass. We left the park as the sun set, its golden glow stretching across the lake. Olivia dozed off in the back seat, clutching her butterfly kite tightly. Marcus was half asleep, his head resting on his sister's shoulder. Elena sat beside me, softly humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. I drove, my heart feeling like everything in the world was right. The road back to Seattle was a 2-lane highway winding through fields and forests. I kept a steady speed, the radio playing soothing jazz. Elena reached over, her fingers intertwining tightly with mine. "Today was fun, wasn't it?" she said, her voice soft. "We should do this more often." I nodded, smiling. More often. Maybe next week my words were cut off by a blinding light ahead. A massive container truck, like a monstrous beast, veered across the center line, heading straight for us. I only heard Elena scream, "Alex, be careful," before everything plunged into darkness. I woke up in a stark white room, the sharp smell of antiseptic filling the air. My head throbbed, my left arm was numb, and a strange, cold emptiness gripped my chest. A nurse stood by my bed, checking a chart. "You're awake," she said, her voice gentle, but cautious. "You have a broken arm and some minor injuries. You're very lucky." Lucky? The word rang like a cruel joke. I tried to sit up, but a wave of pain made me groan. "My wife? My kids? Where are they?" I asked, my voice as if my throat were filled with sand. The nurse looked at me, her eyes darting away. "I'll get the doctor," she said, hurrying out. A chill ran down my spine. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. The doctor entered, a middle-aged man with eyes full of compassion. He sat beside my bed, his voice low. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. The accident, it was severe. Your wife and 2 children, they didn't make it." The world around me collapsed. I heard his words, but they weren't real. They couldn't be. Elena, the girl with a smile brighter than the sun, couldn't be gone. Olivia, my little girl with curly hair and a laugh that echoed, couldn't have vanished. Marcus, my tiny son, who called Papa every time I walked into the room, he couldn't be gone. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, you're wrong. They're fine. They have to be." The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder, but I shoved it away. "Take me to them," I shouted, trying to stand despite the searing pain in my broken arm. "Where are they? Elena! Olivia! Marcus!" The nurse and doctor had to restrain me, injecting a sedative to keep me from hurting myself. I collapsed, tears streaming down my face, but no sound escaped my lips. Only a vast, cold void swallowed everything I had ever loved. The days that followed passed like a nightmare. I lay in the hospital, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened. The truck driver had fallen asleep. The police told me he lost control, crashing head-on into our car. He survived with only a few scratches. But my family? They didn't stand a chance. I didn't know what to feel about the driver, anger, hatred, or just emptiness. I no longer had the strength to feel anything. Elena's parents flew from Portland as soon as they heard. They sat by my bedside, silently holding my hand. Margaret, Elena's mother, wept, her frail shoulders trembling. "Alex, you're our son," she said, her voice choked with sobs. "We lost Elena and the kids, but we won't lose you." Robert didn't say much, but his eyes were filled with pain. He sat there, looking a decade older, as if the accident had taken not only his daughter and grandchildren but a piece of his very soul. "What do you need, Alex?" he asked. "Anything? Just tell me." I didn't answer. I didn't know what I needed, except to turn back time, to hold Elena again, to hear Olivia's laugh and Marcus's voice. But time never grants such wishes. The Whitmores, my own family, were a different story. I called my mother, leaving a trembling voicemail about the accident. I hoped, even just a little, that they'd come. That they'd set aside their pride to be with me in this moment. But no one came. My mother called back, her voice heavy with guilt. "Alex, I wanted to come, but your father, he wouldn't allow it. He said I shouldn't interfere with the life you chose." I gripped the phone, feeling my chest constrict. "Mom, my wife and your 2 grandchildren are dead," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you understand? They're dead." My mother sobbed over the phone, but she didn't come. My father said nothing. Later, I learned a painful truth. My father was busy hosting a birthday party for Nathaniel at the Greenwich Mansion, with expensive wine and high-profile guests. The funeral for my wife and 2 children was held at a small church in Portland, where Elena grew up. I stood before 3 coffins, 2 so tiny they shattered my heart. Olivia still held her butterfly kite in her eternal sleep. Marcus, with his peaceful face, looked like he was having a sweet dream. And Elena, she looked like she was merely asleep, her brown hair gently framing her face, her lips closed as if she had something left to say to me. I sent a funeral notice to the Whitmores, despite Robert's advice against it. "They don't deserve it, Alex," he'd said, his voice thick with anger. But I sent it anyway, foolishly hoping they'd come, that my father would see the 3 graves and realize he was wrong. But no one came. Not a formal condolence, not a single message. I stood before the graves, clutching the crumpled eulogy as tightly as my broken heart. Robert stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "You're my son," he said, his voice firm despite his red-rimmed eyes. "You lost your wife, your children, but you haven't lost your family. We're here, Alex. We'll always be here." I nodded, but inside, I knew I'd lost everything. Elena was my light. Olivia and Marcus were why I woke up each morning. Now I was left with only a void, and I didn't know how to fill it. The weeks after the funeral, I lived like a shadow. I returned to our Seattle apartment where everything reminded me of them. Olivia's pink dress hung in the closet. Marcus's tiny shoes sat in the corner. And Elena's notebook, filled with ideas about fresh food, lay open on the kitchen table. I couldn't touch them, but I couldn't throw them away either. Each night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall Elena's voice, Olivia's laugh, or the way Marcus gripped my finger. But the harder I tried, the more they slipped away. Robert and Margaret visited often, bringing food, stories of Elena as a child. They tried to pull me from the abyss, but I knew they were hurting, too. We were survivors, left to face a world that no longer felt the same. One evening, as I sat alone in the dark apartment, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting Robert, but it was my mother. She stood there in a long coat, her eyes red. "Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry I couldn't come to the funeral. Your father, he..." "Don't talk about him," I cut her off, my voice cold. "Why are you here?" She stepped inside, wrapping her arms around me, and I felt her trembling. "I wanted to see you," she whispered. "I wanted to know if you're okay." I didn't answer. I wasn't okay, and she knew it. But I let her stay, because she was still my mother. We sat in silence, and for the first time, I realized she, too, was a victim of my father, trapped in the gilded cage of the Whitmore family. But her presence couldn't ease my pain. It only reminded me that my family, the ones who should have been there, had chosen to stay out of my life. 6 months after the accident, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like a shadow, couldn't let grief consume me. I stood before the mirror, staring into my own hollow eyes, and told myself, "You have to do something, Alex. For Elena. For Olivia. For Marcus. I wrote a final letter to my father, mother, and Nathaniel. It was brief, just a few lines. I'm no longer part of the Whitmore family. Don't contact me again. I sent it and turned off my phone. I sold all the shares my grandfather had left me in Whitmore Retail Group. A substantial sum, but I didn't need it. Money couldn't buy back what I'd lost. What I needed was a cold, decisive plan for revenge. No mercy. Then I called Robert Lancaster. Dad, I said, calling him that for the first time. I want to join Lancaster Market. I want to carry on what Elena dreamed of. Robert was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Welcome home, son. I moved to Portland a week later. Robert and Margaret welcomed me like a son returning from a war. Their wooden house was the same as ever, with its small garden full of vegetables and the faint smell of freshly baked bread. Margaret hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. We'll get through this together, Alex, she said. For Elena, for the kids. I nodded. But inside, I knew I hadn't come here just to heal. I came to fight, not only for Elena, but for myself. The Whitmores had abandoned me, and now I would abandon them. Joining Lancaster Market sent shockwaves through the media. Business headlines blared, disowned son of Charles Whitmore joins direct competitor. Some called me a traitor, others a maverick breaking tradition. I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for fame or to prove anything to the world. I was doing it for Elena, for Olivia, for Marcus, and to find meaning in a life that had been shattered. Robert brought me into the leadership team as Director of Strategic Development. Lancaster Market's office was in a modest building in Portland, devoid of the oil paintings or New York skyline views of Whitmore Retail's headquarters. But here, I felt a warmth and sincerity I'd never experienced in Greenwich. Employees called Robert Uncle Rob, and they worked not for money, but for a shared belief in the company's mission, to bring good food to every American family. On my first day, I sat in a meeting room with Robert and the other directors. They looked at me with curiosity, some with skepticism. You're Charles Whitmore's son, the finance director said, his tone guarded. Why are you here? I met his gaze without blinking. I'm here because I believe in what Lancaster Market is doing, and because I want to carry on my wife's dream, bringing fresh, affordable food to everyone, not just the wealthy. The room fell silent. Then Robert smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. That's the answer I wanted to hear, he said. Let's get to work, Alex. I threw myself into the job like a man running from his own shadow. Each morning, I woke at 5, rereading Elena's notebook for inspiration. I proposed a new strategy, leveraging the logistics technology I'd worked on at Fresh Route to build a fresh in 24 hours distribution system. The idea was simple but ambitious: deliver fresh food from farms to stores within a day at the lowest cost possible. If successful, it would position Lancaster Market to compete directly with Whitmore Retail, especially in major cities like Chicago, Miami, and Dallas, my father's untouchable strongholds. Robert backed me fully. You can do this, he said during a late-night meeting. Elena would be proud of you. Hearing her name made my heart clench, but I nodded, gripping my pen tightly. I won't let you down, Dad, I said. And for the first time, I felt I wasn't just working for Elena, but for myself, to prove I could stand tall without the Whitmore name. The Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign launched a few months later. It was my idea, inspired by Elena's notes. We weren't just selling food, we were telling a story about ordinary families, workers, single mothers, people who didn't need to spend hundreds of dollars for a quality meal. Our ads appeared on TV and social media, featuring smiling farmers, children holding fresh apples, and the message, Lancaster Market, good food for everyone. The campaign was a direct blow to Whitmore Retail. My father, with his philosophy of luxury goods for the elite, couldn't fathom why middle-class customers, once the backbone of Whitmore's revenue, were turning away. Articles began to compare the two. Lancaster Market is redefining food retail, while Whitmore Retail is stuck in the past. I read those articles, feeling a mix of pride and vindication. But my greater purpose was clear. I was doing this because I believed Elena was right. Everyone deserves to eat well, not just the rich. One evening, as I worked late, my phone rang. It was Nathaniel. I hesitated but picked up. Hey, big brother, his voice came through, cold and mocking. Heard you're making waves at Lancaster Market. Congrats, trader. Nathaniel, I said, struggling to stay calm. If you're just calling to mock me, hang up. Oh, no, he sneered. I just wanted to remind you that you're digging your own grave. Dad won't let this slide. You think you can beat Whitmore Retail? You're wrong. I didn't respond. I hung up. But Nathaniel's words echoed in my mind. I knew my father. He wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who never forgave those who dared challenge him. And I, his eldest son, was now his greatest enemy. I sat in my small office at Lancaster Market's headquarters in Portland, the fluorescent light casting a glow over a desk cluttered with papers and charts. On my computer screen, the latest revenue data showed Lancaster Market was growing, not in small steps, but in leaps and bounds. The Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign had shaken up the food retail market. Our stores in Chicago, Miami, and Dallas, cities once considered impregnable fortresses of Whitmore Retail, were now teeming with customers. Housewives, workers, even those who had once been loyal to my father's upscale brand, were flocking to Lancaster Market for fresh, affordable produce. But I didn't let myself get complacent. Every night before bed, I opened Elena's notebook, rereading her slanted handwriting, fresh in 24 hours. Every family deserves it. Those words were the fire that kept me going, the reason I woke up each morning and threw myself into work like a man racing against time. I wasn't doing this to simply defeat my father, though a small part of me couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing Whitmore Retail falter. I was doing this for Elena, for Olivia, for Marcus, and to prove that a person could live true to their values, no matter the cost. Robert Lancaster called me into his office one autumn morning as golden leaves began to fall across Portland streets. He sat behind his desk, his silver hair gleaming, but his eyes as sharp as the day I first met him. Alex, he said, sliding a folder across the table. You've done what I never dared to dream. Lancaster Market is now a name on everyone's lips, but do you know what that means? I looked at him, waiting. Robert smiled, but his smile carried a hint of concern. It means Charles Whitmore won't sit idly by. He's losing market share, losing shareholders, and most importantly, he's losing his reputation. A man like Charles doesn't accept defeat. I nodded, unsurprised. I knew my father too well. He was the kind of man who would rather burn his empire to the ground than let it fall into someone else's hands. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one. Robert looked at me, his gaze softening. You remind me of Elena, he said. She had that same look. The look of someone who never gives up. I clenched my fists, feeling my heart tighten. Every mention of Elena brought her image to mind, her radiant smile, her sparkling eyes. But I didn't let my emotions pull me under. I had a mission, and I would see it through. Whitmore Retail began to crumble faster than I expected. Quarterly financial reports showed their revenue declining steadily, especially in cities where Lancaster Market had expanded. Their stores in Chicago and Dallas had to close, unable to compete with our prices and delivery speed. Middle-class customers, once captivated by Whitmore Retail's glamour, realized they didn't need to spend hundreds of dollars on olive oil or imported cheese. They wanted fresh, affordable food, and Lancaster Market was delivering it. I drew on my experience from Fresh Route to optimize Lancaster Market's supply chain. The Fresh in 24 Hours system wasn't just a slogan, it was a revolution. We partnered with local farms, using real-time tracking technology to ensure vegetables and fruits reached customers within a day of harvest. Suppliers, once hesitant to work with Lancaster Market for fear of retaliation from Whitmore Retail, were now lining up to sign contracts with us. They appreciated my transparent, efficient approach, and more importantly, they saw the potential in a company experiencing rapid growth. But not everyone was pleased. Nathaniel began appearing in the media, trying to salvage Whitmore Retail's image. In an interview on CNBC, he sat upright in an expensive suit, speaking with polished confidence. Whitmore Retail isn't just a supermarket chain. We're a symbol of sophistication and quality. Competitors like Lancaster Market may attract customers with low prices, but they'll never match our class. I turned off the TV, an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. Nathaniel could say whatever he wanted, but numbers don't lie. Whitmore Retail was losing ground, and I knew they'd soon launch a counterattack. I just didn't expect it to come so quickly. One morning, as I reviewed revenue reports, Robert walked in with a newspaper in hand. "You need to read this," he said, his voice tense. It was the Wall Street Journal, with a bold headline, "Whitmore Retail Accuses Lancaster Market of Copyright Infringement in Advertising Campaign." The article quoted my father, Charles Whitmore, alleging that our Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign had copied an old Whitmore retail campaign. He announced plans to sue Lancaster Market, seeking millions in damages. I read the article, feeling my blood boil. This wasn't the first time my father had used lawsuits to crush competitors. He'd done it to Lancaster Market years ago, when Elena was a child, and now he was repeating history. But this time, I wasn't the 16-year-old boy sitting in on his boardroom meetings. I was Alex, Lancaster Market's Director of Strategic Development, and I wouldn't let him win so easily. I immediately convened our legal team. "They have no evidence," I said, my voice firm. "Our campaign was built on Elena's ideas, from her notebook. This is a dirty tactic, but we won't back down." The legal team agreed that Whitmore Retail's lawsuit lacked a strong foundation, but they warned that a legal battle could be lengthy and costly. "Charles Whitmore doesn't need to win," one lawyer said. "He just needs to distract us and damage our reputation." I nodded. But inside, I knew this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a declaration of war. My father was sending a message. He still controlled the game, and I couldn't escape his shadow. But he was wrong. I was no longer Alex Whitmore, the obedient eldest son. I was Alex, fighting for my wife's dream, and I wouldn't let him destroy it. The lawsuit dragged on for months, but it didn't deter us. While the lawyers handled the paperwork, I focused on expanding Lancaster Market. We opened 10 new stores in major cities, from Atlanta to San Francisco. Each new store was a dagger to my father's pride. I imagined him sitting in his Manhattan office, reading declining revenue reports, his face red with rage. But I didn't stop. I accelerated the Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign, launching new ads featuring real families sharing how Lancaster Market had changed the way they eat. One ad featured a single mother in Chicago saying, "I used to think fresh food was only for the rich." Lancaster Market proved me wrong. Audiences loved those stories. Our revenue soared, and suppliers began pulling away from Whitmore Retail. One of our biggest wins came when a major California farmers cooperative emailed me, saying they wanted to shift their entire contract to Lancaster Market because your way of doing business is transparent and respects us. It was a major victory, and it made me smile for the first time in months. The climax came at a national food retail conference in Las Vegas. I was invited to speak as Lancaster Market's representative. As I stepped onto the stage, my heart pounded, not from nerves, but because I knew my father was there, sitting somewhere in the audience. I didn't look at him, but I felt his gaze, cold, judgmental, like the day he disowned me. I stood before hundreds of people, from CEOs to journalists, and began my speech. "Lancaster Market isn't just about selling food," I said, my voice clear and strong. "We're about bringing hope. We believe every American family, rich or poor, deserves to eat well. We're not building a brand for the elite. We're building a brand for everyone." The crowd applauded, but I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to Elena, to Olivia, to Marcus. I was speaking to those who believed in me, and to myself. When I finished, a Forbes reporter stood up and asked, "Mr. Whitmore, do you think Lancaster Market's success is a declaration of war against Whitmore Retail, your father's company?" I smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of a man who had found his path. "I'm not declaring war on anyone," I said. "I'm just doing what my wife, Elena Lancaster, dreamed of, bringing good food to everyone. If that makes us a competitor to anyone, that's their problem, not mine." The crowd applauded again, louder this time. I stepped off the stage, feeling as though a weight had been lifted. As I passed through the rows of seats, I caught a glimpse of my father sitting in the back, his face hard as stone. He didn't clap. He didn't look at me. But I knew he'd heard every word. After the conference, articles began to appear, "Alexander Whitmore, the game changer in food retail." They called me the Whitmore Rebel, the man who abandoned his family legacy to pursue a greater dream. Some even compared me to David slaying Goliath. I didn't like those comparisons. My father wasn't Goliath. He was just a man trapped by his own pride. Whitmore Retail continued to weaken. Shareholders began questioning Nathaniel's competence as he struggled under the pressure. A Bloomberg article revealed that Nathaniel had spent millions on lavish, ineffective ad campaigns, while Lancaster Market won customers' trust with authentic, relatable ones. Whitmore retail stores continued to close, and their stock plummeted on the exchange. One evening, as I worked late, Robert walked into my office with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "We need to celebrate," he said, his smile radiant. "Today we officially surpassed Whitmore Retail in market share in 3 major states." I took the glass but didn't drink right away. I looked at Robert, the man who had become a father to me in a way Charles Whitmore never could. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "For believing in me." Robert raised his glass, clinking it against mine. "No, Alex," he said. "Thank you for keeping Elena's dream alive." A week after the celebration with Robert, I received an email from an unfamiliar address with no sender's name, just a single, terse line: "Meet me at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, Friday, 7 p.m., meeting room 3. CW. I didn't need a full signature to know who it was. Charles Whitmore, my father, was finally ready to face me. I stared at the email, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, torn between deleting it and responding. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him drown in the ruins of his crumbling empire. But another part, the part that still carried Whitmore blood, couldn't turn away. I needed to look him in the eye, to hear him speak, if only to confirm that I was right to cut ties with him. I replied, "I'll be there." New York greeted me with the biting chill of winter, gusts of wind sweeping through streets aglow with Christmas lights. I stepped into the Waldorf Astoria, a place that had once been the playground of the Whitmore family during lavish galas. The lobby was as opulent as I remembered, with marble columns and warm golden light. But I was no longer the boy trailing behind my father in an oversized suit. I was Alex, a man who had chosen his own path. And I wasn't here to beg for forgiveness. I was here to confront him. Meeting room 3 was on an upper floor, with windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. When I pushed open the door, my father was already there, seated at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper. But his gaze was as sharp as ever, like a blade ready to cut down anyone who dared defy him. He didn't stand, didn't greet me, just gestured for me to sit. "Alex," he said, his voice low and deliberate, as if weighing every word. "You've done well. I didn't expect you to go this far with that cheap supermarket chain." I sat across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "Lancaster Market isn't cheap," I said. "We bring good food to everyone. Something Whitmore Retail has never done." He gave a dry, mocking laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "You still talk like a naive idealist, Alex. You think you're changing the world? You're just tearing down your family's legacy." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the anger rising within me. "Legacy?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "What's your legacy, Dad? An empire built on arrogance? A family you were willing to abandon for the sake of your ego?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You dare talk to me about family? You're the one who betrayed us. You chose that Lancaster girl, that low-class supermarket chain, over Whitmore Retail. Did you think I'd stand by and watch you destroy everything I've built?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself. You chose Nathaniel's birthday party over the funeral of my wife and children. You chose your reputation over your family. That was your choice, not mine." The air in the room grew heavy. My father fell silent, but I saw his hand tremble slightly on the table. For the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. Not regret, but uncertainty. He stood and walked to the window, staring down at the city below. "Whitmore Retail is struggling," he said, his voice flat, like he was reading a financial report. "Shareholders are pulling out. Nathaniel, he's not strong enough to hold the company together. I need you, Alex. Come back. Help me save it. You're still my son." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "Save the company?" I asked. "You think I'd come back after everything you've done? After you disowned me? After you didn't even show up to Elena's, Olivia's, or Marcus's funeral?" He turned back, his face hardening. I was busy, he said, his voice cold. I have responsibilities to the company, to the shareholders. You wouldn't understand. I stood, stepping closer to him, just a few feet away. Busy? I said, my voice trembling with anger. Too busy to see your daughter-in-law and grandchildren one last time? Have you ever felt regret, Dad? Have you ever thought about how you chose Nathaniel's birthday party over standing by me when I lost everything? He didn't answer. He looked at me, his eyes clouded, not with tears, but with the emptiness of a man who had lost everything, yet refused to admit it. I shook my head, feeling the last invisible thread between us snap. I was your son, I said. But you buried me along with them. I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. As the door closed behind me, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was no longer Alex Whitmore, the eldest son of Charles Whitmore. I was Alex, fighting for Elena's dream, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, stop me. In the weeks that followed, Whitmore Retail continued to collapse. News reports detailed how the company was selling off assets to pay debts. Nathaniel appeared on television, trying to maintain an air of confidence, but his eyes betrayed panic. Some major shareholders publicly criticized his competence, calling him an unworthy heir. I didn't feel joy reading those reports, but I didn't feel pity either. Nathaniel had chosen to stand with my father, and now he was facing the consequences. Lancaster Market, meanwhile, kept expanding. We opened new stores in cities where Whitmore Retail had once dominated. The Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign became a phenomenon, studied in universities as a textbook example of value-driven marketing. Suppliers continued to abandon Whitmore Retail to sign contracts with us, and I received emails from farmers thanking Lancaster Market for giving them access to larger markets than ever before. One morning, Robert called me into his office. He slid a newspaper across the desk, its headline blaring, "Whitmore Retail Files for Bankruptcy Protection." I read the article, feeling as though a chapter of my life was closing. The company my father had spent his life building, the one he'd once hoped I'd inherit, was now just a name in headlines. "What do you think, Alex?" Robert asked, his eyes searching mine. I folded the paper and set it down. "I don't think anything," I said. "Whitmore Retail is no longer part of me. But Lancaster Market, that's my home." Robert nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "You've done what I never dared dream," he said. "But you know, Alex, what I'm most proud of isn't the revenue or market share. It's you, a man who rose from the ashes and kept fighting." I smiled for the first time in months, feeling a slight lightness in my heart. "Thank you, Dad," I said. "But this fight isn't over. We still have work to do." 2 years later, Lancaster Market had become the dominant name in food retail. We held over 60% of the market share across the United States, a figure even Robert, with all his optimism, hadn't dared to dream of. Our stores sprouted everywhere, from struggling neighborhoods in Detroit to bustling suburbs in Los Angeles. The Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign was no longer just a slogan, it had become a movement, a reminder that good food shouldn't be a privilege for the wealthy. But no matter how sweet Lancaster Market's successes were, they couldn't fill the void in my heart. I still saw Lena in every corner of my life. In the smell of morning coffee, in Olivia's pink dress hanging in the closet, in Marcus's tiny shoes sitting alone in a corner. I had achieved so much, but the cost was too great. I wondered if Elena would truly be proud of me, or if she would want me to stop, to slow down and find some peace. One autumn afternoon, Robert called me into his office. He sat there looking older, but with the same warm smile I'd seen the day we met. "Alex," he said softly. "I've decided to retire." I looked at him, stunned. "Retire? Dad, Lancaster Market is at its peak. You can't." He raised a hand, cutting me off. "I've worked my whole life, Alex. I built Lancaster Market from a single store in Portland, and now it's bigger than I ever dreamed. But I'm tired. I want to spend the time I have left with Margaret, with our garden, and maybe to remember Elena in a way I haven't had time to do." I nodded, though inside I felt a twinge of panic. Robert was the backbone of Lancaster Market, the one who had guided me through my darkest days. The thought of him leaving felt like losing an anchor. "And I want you to take over," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "You'll be the CEO of Lancaster Market." I opened my mouth to protest, but he shook his head. Don't say no, Alex. You're the right person for this. You understand Elena's dream, our values. You've proven that. Not just to me, but to the world. I sat in silence, feeling a wave swell in my chest. CEO of Lancaster Market. It was something Elena had once teased me about during those late nights at the kitchen table, dreaming wild dreams. One day you'll run the whole retail world, Alex, she'd laughed, playfully punching my shoulder. But don't let it make you arrogant, okay? I don't know if I'm worthy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I've done everything for Elena, but I still feel like I haven't done enough. Robert stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder. You've done more than enough, Alex. You've made her dream a reality. Now do this for yourself. Live a life you're proud of. I nodded, tears welling up, but I held them back. I'll try, Dad, I said. I promise. The day I officially became CEO, Lancaster Market held a small press conference at our Portland headquarters. Reporters from across the country flooded in, cameras flashing, and I stood at the podium, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. I'm not here to build an empire, I said, my voice clear. I'm here to carry on a legacy. Elena Lancaster's legacy, who believed everyone deserves to eat well and live well. Lancaster Market won't stop, because we're not just selling food. We're bringing hope. The crowd applauded, and I looked down to see Robert and Margaret standing in the front row, smiling. But in that moment, I could almost see Elena standing beside them, her brown eyes shining brightly. I blinked, and she was gone. But I knew she was always there, in every decision I made and every step I took. That autumn, I returned to the cemetery in Portland, where Elena, Olivia, and Marcus rested. The cemetery sat on a small hill, with rows of oak trees blazing red under the setting sun. I walked along the path, carrying a bouquet of daisies, Elena's favorite flower. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby Lancaster Market store, one I had personally inaugurated months earlier. I knelt before the 3 graves, placing the daisies on each one. I did it, Elena, I whispered, my voice soft enough for only the wind to hear. Lancaster Market is for everyone now, just like you always wanted. I kept my promise. I touched Olivia's headstone, then Marcus's, feeling my heart constrict. I wish you and the kids were here to see it. I sat there in silence, letting the memories flood back. Olivia's laughter as she chased her butterfly kite, the way Marcus gripped my finger when I held him, Elena's smile when she looked at me as if I were her entire world. Those memories were painful, but they were also my strength. They reminded me that I had lived, had loved, and no matter how great the loss, I still had a reason to keep going. A soft breeze swept through, carrying the scent of bread, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I stood, looking out at the hill where the sun was setting, painting the sky a brilliant orange. Thank you, Elena, I whispered, for giving me a reason to live. In the years that followed, Lancaster Market continued to grow. But I was no longer just a man driven by a fight. I learned to slow down, as Robert had advised. I spent time with him and Margaret, helping them tend their small garden in Portland. I started a charitable foundation in Elena's name, providing free food to children in underserved neighborhoods. Every time I saw a child holding a fresh apple and smiling, I saw Olivia. I saw Marcus. And I knew I was doing the right thing. As for the Whitmores, I cut off all contact. I heard my father had left New York, moving to a small house in the suburbs after Whitmore Retail's bankruptcy. Nathaniel tried to launch a new company but failed. My mother sent letters occasionally, but I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't forgive, but because I had found a new family, the Lancasters, the people who believed in me, and the family of dreams I was living. My story ends here, but my life doesn't. Each day I wake up, carrying Elena, Olivia, and Marcus in my heart. I walk into the office, watching Lancaster Market's employees work with passion, and I know I found my purpose. I'm no longer Alex Whitmore, the eldest son of an empire. I'm Alex, a man who lost everything but found himself again. Who turned pain into hope. And who will keep living for those I love, and for myself.